You know, when you move into an apartment, you're kind of making a pact with everyone who lives there. It's this unspoken deal of shared anonymity. You've got dozens, maybe hundreds, of neighbors separated from you by just a few inches of drywall. You hear the muffled soundtrack of their lives, a TV show, a fussy baby, an argument that creeps past the volume limit. You might nod at them in the hallway, that silent acknowledgement of your shared patch of the world, but you don't really know them, and they don't really know you. There's a strange comfort in that. But what happens when that boundary gets crossed? When the anonymity you thought was a shield turns into a cover for something awful? The stories you're about to hear were pulled from the dark corners of the internet forums and anonymous posts where people shared experiences that turned their homes into places of fear. While the specific details are unverified, they describe a kind of horror that feels disturbingly real. They're a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones with a key to the apartment right next door. Story 1: The Sound of a Key. This first story comes from a user on a popular forum. The account is gone now, but the post is still archived, like a digital ghost story. The writer was a man in his late 20s, sharing a two-bedroom with his best friend in a big, modern building. The kind of place that feels safe fob entry. For the main door, heavy-duty locks. The thing that went wrong happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The author insisted this detail was important because it's the last time you'd expect a crime to happen. It wasn't the dead of night. It was under the flat, boring light of a weekday. He was working from home, and around 2 p.m., he hauled a laundry basket down to the communal machines in the basement. His roommate was home, but he was in the shower, blasting music from a Bluetooth speaker, totally oblivious. The trip to the basement was forgettable. He loaded the washers, set a timer, and went back upstairs. He remembered being slightly annoyed he'd forgotten his headphones. The first thing that felt wrong when he got back was the silence. The only sound was the distant thump of his roommate's music. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone when he heard it, a tiny sound, so small he almost ignored it. The sound of metal gently touching metal at his front door. He froze. Then, a faint scratch and a definite jiggle of the doorknob. His blood went ice cold. Logic said it was his roommate, but he could still hear the shower music. He stood up slowly, his heart starting to pound. "Hello," he called out. His voice sounded weak, shaky. No answer. Just a heavy, loaded silence that felt way worse than the noise. He crept toward the entryway. In their apartment, the front door was tucked in a little alcove, so you couldn't see it from the living room. You had to physically walk into the hall to see it, and every nerve in his body was screaming not to. "Who's there?" He tried again, faking a confidence he absolutely did not feel. Still nothing. After what felt like forever, he decided he was just being paranoid. Maybe a neighbor got the wrong door. He took a deep breath, let out a shaky laugh, and stepped into the hall. The door was closed. The deadbolt was thrown, just like he'd left it. A wave of relief washed over him. He was just being jumpy. He was about to turn around when he heard the ding of the elevator down the hall, then its doors sliding shut. A second later, he heard footsteps, fast and heavy, pounding down the fire stairs. A new, colder dread settled in on a hunch. He walked through the apartment, past the bathroom where his roommate was still singing, and went into his bedroom. It was a mess, but not his mess. His laptop was gone, His dresser drawers were cracked open. He checked his roommate's room. His friend's laptop was gone, too. So was a little jewelry box his girlfriend kept there. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Someone had been in the apartment. They were in there while his roommate was in the shower. They were in there moments ago. The sound he'd heard wasn't someone trying to get in. It was the sound of them leaving. They must have heard him call out and bolted. They were so quiet, so fast. They'd slipped past a deadbolt in broad daylight, grabbed their most valuable stuff, and vanished without making enough noise to be heard over a shower speaker. The police and the building manager came. According to the Post, the manager eventually admitted there'd been a string of similar break-ins. Always during the day, always targeting electronics. They suspected someone had a tool or a technique to bypass the locks without leaving a mark. Now, an incident like that would normally make local news, but searches for any specific police report come up empty. The story just exists in its original anonymous post. The writer said the stolen laptops were nothing. What was really taken was his sense of safety. For months, every creak in the building, every footstep in the hall, shot a spike of panic through him. The horror wasn't just that a stranger was in his home. It was that they did it so easily, moving through his private space like a ghost, an invisible predator in the one place. On Earth, he was supposed to be safe. An intruder who steals your stuff is a nightmare. But the fear hits a completely different level when you have no idea what the intruder wants. The next story, from a subreddit for unsettling encounters, is about a violation that was far more personal. A story about an intruder who didn't want to take anything, but simply wanted to be there. Story 2, The Whispering Man. This story was posted by a young woman who used the name Clara to protect herself. She lived alone in a modern, high-rise apartment with 24/7 concierge and top-tier security. That security was a big reason she chose it, since her job meant she had to travel sometimes. Her story starts while her building was doing some minor renovations. For a few weeks, the halls were full of contractors. Clara noted that one of them was a little too friendly, always trying to start conversations that lasted too long. He made her uneasy, but she just wrote it off as him being overly chatty. A couple of weeks later, he was gone, and she figured his part of the job was done. She forgot all about him. About a month later, she was asleep. It was sometime after 2 a.m. on a weeknight. She was in that blurry space between sleep and wakefulness when she felt a presence in the room. The first thing she registered was pressure on the bed near her feet, like someone had just sat down. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the darkness. She was completely frozen, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Was this a dream? Sleep paralysis? And then she heard it. A man's voice, whispering her name. Clara. It was soft, raspy, and it was right there in the room with her. The sound shattered her paralysis. She lunged for her phone on the nightstand, her fingers fumbling with the screen. As the display lit up, the sudden bright light cut through the gloom. In that split second, she saw a tall, dark shape recoil from the foot of her bed. The figure scrambled away, moving with a terrifying quickness toward her bedroom door. She let out a raw, ragged scream. As the man fled her room, he triggered a motion-activated light she had in the hallway. The corridor was instantly flooded with stark, white light, and for just a fraction of a second, she saw his face. It was the contractor, the one who had been too friendly. And then he was gone, the front door of her apartment clicking shut behind him. She lay there, hyperventilating, phone clutched in her hand as she called 911. police came, and so did the night concierge. They searched, but he was gone. There was no sign of forced entry. Her door had been locked. The investigation, Clara wrote, uncovered a chilling truth. The contracting company had a sloppy system for managing master keys. The contractor she identified had been fired weeks earlier after other staff complained, but he'd never returned his key. He had access to every single apartment in that building. The police questioned him, but he denied everything. Clara's post states that without any forensic evidence, no charges were ever filed. He was just questioned and released. The incident was classified as a suspected burglary attempt, but Clara knew that wasn't it. He hadn't tried to steal anything. He sat on her bed and watched her sleep. He whispered her name. Clara broke her lease and moved out the next week. She couldn't stay. The building that she chose for its security now felt like a cage full of invisible doors only a monster knew how to open. She wrote that the most haunting part was the complete lack of justice. He was still out there, and he still had a key. While the specific legal outcome of this story can't be corroborated, it's a terrifying example of the trust we put in people who are given access to our homes. The Whispering Man wasn't a ghost. He was someone she had seen, smiled at, and tried to forget, and he had remembered her. From the very human horror of a stalker, we move to a fear that's more primal, a crawling dread that makes you feel like your home itself is sick. This next story comes from someone who battled not just one intruder, but an entire army of them. Story 3, The Wolves Are Alive. The author, we'll call him David, had just moved into a character apartment in an older building. It had charm, uneven floors, vintage fixtures, and more importantly, it was cheap. For the first few weeks, it was great. But then, the character started making noise. It started with scratching sounds coming from inside the walls at night. He figured it was mice, a common issue in old buildings. He set some traps and emailed his landlord, but the sounds didn't stop. They got worse. The faint scratching turned into frantic scurrying, the sound of tiny claws racing around just behind the drywall. Sometimes he'd hear a wet, gnawing sound that made his skin crawl. The noises were everywhere now. He started finding small black droppings in his pantry. The landlord sent a handyman who put down a few more sticky traps and told him to keep his food sealed. The problem, he was told, was being handled, but it wasn't. A strange, musty, and deeply foul smell started to fill the apartment, strongest in the kitchen. At the same time, David noticed a dark, discolored patch forming on the kitchen ceiling. It looked like a water stain, but it was growing, and it felt weirdly soft and spongy. The final straw, the moment this went from a pain to a full-blown horror story, happened one night while he was making dinner. He heard a loud crack from the ceiling. He looked up at the stain. A long fissure had split across it, and a dark, thick liquid was dripping out. Before he could even react, the ceiling started to bulge down. He stumbled back just as the saturated drywall gave way. With a sickening wet tear, a huge section of the ceiling ripped open. What fell out wasn't plaster and water. It was a writhing, squirming mass of cockroaches. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, poured onto his kitchen floor in a living waterfall of insects, along with chunks of wet nesting material and a smell that made him physically sick. The colony had been massive, living and breeding in the ceiling, their waste soaking the drywall until it finally collapsed. He fled the apartment, gagging, and called an emergency exterminator himself. Even the exterminator was visibly shocked. According to David's post, The guy did a walkthrough and found the source of the scratching to a severe rat infestation, sharing the space with the roaches. His verdict was fast and terrifying. The apartment was a legitimate health hazard, and the sheer scale of the infestation meant the building's structural integrity could be compromised. He told David, in no uncertain terms, to get out for good. The post ends with the start of a legal nightmare. The landlord tried to blame David for the infestation. Housing authorities got involved. While severe infestations are a documented reality, this specific narrative of a catastrophic ceiling collapse of insects remains an unverified, anonymous account. David's story wasn't about a ghost. It was about the horror of a home that's fundamentally broken. The creeping realization that the charming apartment he'd moved into was actually a tomb, and he'd been sharing it with its rotting inhabitants all along. It's one thing to have your home invaded by pests. It's another to learn that a person has been invading it not to steal, but just to watch. This next account is especially disturbing because it involves a deep betrayal by someone who was supposed to ensure the narrator's safety. Story 4: The Man in the Closet. The story was shared by a woman named Jenna, a nurse who worked long, irregular hours, living alone. She was extremely security conscious and even had an indoor camera pointed at her front door. It was her digital watchdog. One evening, she was on her dinner break at work when she got a motion alert from her camera. Not that unusual. Sometimes a shift in sunlight triggered it. She opened the notification, expecting an empty room. Instead, her blood turned to ice. The footage was from just a minute earlier. It showed her front door opening and a man stepping out of her apartment. He glanced down the hall, then quietly pulled the door shut. He hadn't come in. He'd gone out, which meant he had been inside her apartment for who knows how long before the camera was triggered. She didn't recognize him at first. He was wearing the generic navy blue uniform of the building's maintenance staff. Panic set in. She called her building's front desk, her voice shaking as she explained what her camera just recorded, and sent the video to the manager. Then she rushed home from work, her mind racing. Who was this guy? How long was he in there? What was he doing? When she got home, she and the building manager reviewed the hallway security footage. The story got even more sinister. They saw the maintenance worker, a man she recognized as Frank, use his master key to let himself into her apartment that morning, right after she'd left for work. He didn't come back out until the clip she saw on her phone nearly 10 hours later. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. This was almost more terrifying than a robbery. The building management confronted the worker. He denied it at first, but the video was undeniable. According to Jenna's post, he finally confessed, and his confession was pure nightmare fuel. For months, he'd been using his master key to enter the apartments of female tenants he knew lived alone. He would go in after they left and hide in a closet. He would stay there for hours, silent and hidden, waiting for them to come home. He'd watch them cook dinner, watch TV, get ready for bed. Sometimes he'd stay hidden all night, only leaving the next morning after they had gone to work. He never touched anything. He just watched. While cases of maintenance staff abusing their access have been documented, a specific confession of this duration and nature hasn't been found in any verifiable public record. It exists as a chilling story shared in an online community. Jenna's post doesn't mention any legal consequences, which is maybe the most unsettling part. The idea that this man might only get fired for what he did is terrifying. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was now just a collection of dark corners where a monster could have been hiding. She moved out. But how do you ever really feel safe again? Our final story is maybe the most insidious. It's not about a single event, but a slow burn terror shared by an entire community. This narrative was reportedly pieced together from a private online forum where multiple tenants from the same building shared their eerily similar experiences with a stranger who seemed to live in their hallway. Story 5, The Man in the Hallway. The story starts with a young couple who had just moved into a sprawling, slightly dated apartment complex with long, maze-like corridors. A few weeks after they moved in, they started noticing him, a man they didn't recognize, who didn't seem to live there, but was just always around.
Section 5.
They'd see him in the stairwell,
The woman
just
in the
standing on a
restraints.
landing,
Our final
staring at the
story
wall.
is perhaps the
Or
most
they'd catch a
mysterious
glimpse of
and
him
haunting.
at the far end
It
of
takes
a long
us to
hallway,
Montgomery County,
just lingering.
Texas, in a
He was
subdivision
nondescript,
called
which made
Sunrise
him both
Ranch.
easy to ignore
On a Friday
and
morning
hard to
in
forget.
August 2018,
He never made eye
at
contact.
exactly
If
3:20
you got
a.m.,
close,
a
he'd just
resident
turn
was woken
and
by
walk
their
away,
doorbell ringing over
disappearing
and
down another
over.
corridor.
When they got up to
The couple
answer,
brushed it off at
no
first,
one was there.
but their encounters got
It
weirder.
was only when they
One
checked
night,
their doorbell
the
camera
woman was walking to
that
her
they
door
discovered
and
who
saw
their
him standing near
later-night
her neighbor's
visitor had
peephole,
been.
his body pressed to the wall,
The
as
footage
if he
went
were listening.
viral. The
He
Montgomery
didn't seem to see
County
her
Sheriff's
until she was right
Office
there.
asked for the public's
Then
help,
he just shuffled
and
away
internet
into the
sleuths
stairwell.
around the world began
Unsettled,
proposing theories.
she mentioned it
Who
on the
was
building's
she?
private social
Where
media
did she
group.
come from?
The floodgates
Police were
opened.
inundated
It turned
with
out
flyers
dozens
of
of
missing
tenants had seen
persons,
him.
but
They
none
called
were
him
a match.
the Hallway Man.
They
One person
canvassed the
found a
neighborhood
single,
and
worn-out
discovered
glove
she
left
had rung
outside
the
their door.
doorbells of at least 5
Another heard
different
soft,
houses that
rhythmic
night.
knocking
A
late at
frantic
night,
search for a
but
safe
saw an
harbor
empty
that
hall through the
never
peephole.
answered.
A
For
few,
days,
though,
she was
had
a
looked
ghost,
just fast
a
enough
Jane Doe
to see his
who
back
had emerged
as he
from the
rounded the corner.
darkness only to
The
be
collective
swallowed
stories
by it
painted
again.
a chilling picture.
The climax
This
of
was a
this
pattern.
story comes
This was
not from
someone
the video,
deliberately
but
haunting
from
the
a
residents.
tragic event 5
Multiple
days
tenants
later.
reported him to management,
The
but
sheriff's
according to the
office
forum
received
posts,
a
they were
call to do
dismissive,
a welfare
calling it
check on a
transient behavior.
49-year-old
They
man
promised more
in the
security
same
patrols, but
subdivision
the Hallway Man
who had
remained.
reportedly
The
made
tenants started feeling like
suicidal
prisoners.
comments.
Walking from
When
the elevator
deputies
to their
arrived,
apartment
they
became
found
an
the man
exercise in
deceased
anxiety.
from what
Who
appeared
was
to
he?
be a
What did he want?
self-inflicted
And how did he
gunshot
keep getting
wound.
into a secure
At
building?
the scene,
The
they
climax
found
came
a
one night
suicide note.
when a tenant with a new doorbell camera got a
The
motion alert.
truth was
They opened the
horrifying
live feed
and
to
tragic.
see the Hallway Man
She had been
standing
living
right in
with
front
her
of their door.
49-year-old boyfriend
He wasn't
in the
knocking.
house where he was found
He wasn't
dead.
listening.
The restraints on
He
her
was trying the
wrists were
doorknob,
real. This small
slowly,
doorbell camera
methodically,
recorded the
twisting
final,
it back and
desperate
forth.
moments of a
When it
woman's
didn't open,
escape
he
from a
moved
house
to the
of
next
horror
door
story
and tried
that
that one.
ended with her freedom,
And the one
but
after that.
also with the death
The tenant
of her
immediately
captor.
called the police
Conclusion.
and shared the video on the tenant
These
forum.
5 stories
It was
are
the
more
proof
than
they all
just
needed.
scary clips.
The video,
They're reminders
plus
of how
over a dozen
fragile
witness
our
statements,
sense of safety really is.
finally forced
They
the
show
police
that the
and management
darkness on
to
the
take
other
it
side of
seriously.
our front doors
As the tenants
isn't
described
just
it,
an absence
the man
of
was
light,
eventually identified
but
and arrested.
a space where
The
real-world
twist
horror can
was sickeningly
unfold.
simple. He was a
A
former
doorbell
tenant
camera
who'd been
might
evicted
be
months
a
earlier.
silent watchman,
He never returned
but
his
as we've
keys.
seen, it can
He'd been
also
using his old
become
key
an
to get in
impartial
and wander
witness
the
to our
halls for
worst
weeks,
nightmares,
maybe months,
recording events
feeding
that
on the fear
change
he was
lives
creating.
forever. From the
This composite
unresolved
story,
screams in Los
drawn from an
Angeles
unnamed
to the
online forum,
violent escape
lacks a
in
verifiable
quiet
police
Texas
case to
suburb.
confirm the details.
These cameras
Existing
have
as a
captured
piece of digital
moments of
folklore
pure
pieced
terror.
together by a community
They remind
under
us
siege.
that even in our
Even
own
after his
homes,
arrest,
we're only
the tenants
a
wrote
locked
that the
door
sense of
away
security
from
in the building was
chaos
shattered.
outside.
The knowledge
And they leave
that someone
us
had
with
that kind
a
of
deeply
access for so long
unsettling
left a
question.
permanent scar.
What's happening
The
just
Hallway Man was
outside
gone,
your door?
but the the hallways
right now,
themselves would
in the
never feel
dark.
the same.
Thank you for
The
joining
walls
me.
of an apartment are
If you
thin.
found these
They
stories
separate
as
our lives,
compelling as I
our
did,
secrets,
please
our
like this
peace.
video,
But these
subscribe
stories,
to the channel,
these dispatches from
and
the
hit
internet's
that
dark corners,
notification bell
remind
to
us that those
join us
walls
for
aren't
our
always
next
enough.
investigation.
A
Stay
key in the
safe
wrong
out there.
hands, a neglected crawl space, a hidden corner sometimes. That's all it takes for the horror to seep through. After hearing these, you might find yourself listening a little more closely to the creaks and groans of your own building. And you might think twice about that unexplained noise in the hall. If you have a scary story of your own, I'd love to read it in the comments below. And if you want more unsettling tales like these, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know what you might hear.